Amara had spent her life being invisible, working 2 jobs to make ends meet in a town that barely saw her as more than a shadow. But when a letter arrived one afternoon, her world shifted in an instant. Millions of dollars now rested in her hands, but could this windfall be a blessing, or was it the beginning of something far more complicated? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. Amara Jones had always been the kind of person who kept her head down and focused on the task at hand. In a world where people like her, black women from modest backgrounds, were often overlooked or worse, scrutinized, Amara had learned to stay out of trouble by staying out of sight. She lived a quiet, unassuming life in a small town that was both home and a constant reminder of how society viewed her. Every day was the same routine: waking up before dawn, working as a cleaner for wealthy families, and then heading to her second job at a local diner. The days were long, and the work was hard, but she did it without complaint. She had to. Her mother's health was failing, and her younger brother Malik still had 2 years of high school left. They depended on her. The town, like so many others, had its way of subtly letting people like Amara know their place. She had always felt a low hum of prejudice in the air. Nothing too blatant, at least not in public. But there were the condescending looks, the assumptions, the way people's voices would change ever so slightly when they addressed her, as if they couldn't quite help themselves from seeing her as different. Even at the diner where she worked the evening shift, there was a hierarchy, an invisible line separating her from the other waitstaff, most of whom were white and younger. She was never invited to after-work gatherings, never included in conversations unless it was about the job. She felt the weight of their disinterest, but she had grown used to it. It was on one of those typically long days, as she returned home after a double shift, that Amara's life was suddenly upended. She had barely set her bag down when she noticed the letter sitting on the small table by the door. It was an unusual envelope, stiff, cream-colored, and embossed with the name of a law firm. Frowning, she opened it, expecting it to be some mix-up or a solicitation. But as her eyes scanned the words on the page, her hands began to tremble. The letter informed her that she had inherited a substantial estate from a great-aunt she barely knew existed. The woman, apparently, had passed away quietly a few months prior, and after all the legal formalities were taken care of, the inheritance was to be transferred to her, Amara Jones. The total sum? $8 million. Amara's first reaction was disbelief. She had never known wealth in any form. Her life had always been one of struggle and sacrifice, with no room for dreams of sudden fortune. As she sat down on the worn-out couch in her tiny living room, the enormity of what she had just read washed over her. $8 million. It felt like a dream, something impossible. She wasn't the kind of person this happened to. She wasn't even sure if it was real. For hours, she sat there, the letter still in her hand, her mind racing. She thought about her great-aunt, a distant relative she vaguely remembered hearing about as a child. There had been talk of a woman who had moved away from the family and built a life for herself in some far-off place. But Amara had never been close to that side of the family. They were distant, both emotionally and geographically, and she had never imagined they would leave anything to her. The letter gave her the name of a lawyer to contact for more details. But even as she held her phone in her hand, Amara hesitated. What did this mean for her? Could it really be true? What would her life look like if it was? Finally, after what felt like hours of sitting in stunned silence, she dialed the number. Law offices of Randolph & Associates. How can I help you? A cheerful voice on the other end answered. Hi, this is Amara Jones. I got a letter about an inheritance. Ah, yes, Miss Jones, we've been expecting your call. Let me transfer you to Mr. Randolph. He's been handling your case. A brief pause followed, and then a new voice came on the line, this one deeper, more formal. Miss Jones, I'm so glad you reached out. I understand this must come as a bit of a shock. I've been working on the estate of your great-aunt, and everything has been processed legally. The funds are ready to be transferred to your account as soon as we complete some final paperwork. Congratulations on your inheritance. Is this... it sounds too good to be true. Are you sure there's no mistake? Amara asked, still dazed. I can assure you, Miss Jones, there is no mistake. Your great-aunt left specific instructions that you were to inherit the entirety of her estate. You are the sole beneficiary. Amara sat there, trying to process his words. This was real. This was happening. I don't know what to say, she stammered. It's overwhelming. I understand, Mr. Randolph said gently. These things can be life-changing, and we will assist you through the process. I'll send you all the necessary documents, and we can arrange a meeting to go over everything in person if you'd like. Amara thanked him, her voice shaky, and ended the call. She stared at the phone for a long time afterward, her mind swirling with thoughts and emotions she couldn't quite pin down. She glanced around her small living room. The frayed edges of the carpet, the chipped paint on the walls, the second-hand furniture, all of it seemed out of place now, like remnants of a life she no longer belonged to. $8 million. It was a number that didn't make sense to her. How could she, Amara, have that much money? The weight of the realization finally settled in. Her life was about to change forever. The days that followed the discovery of her newfound wealth were a blur of disbelief and confusion. Amara had never considered herself a wealthy person. In fact, wealth had always seemed like something other people had. People who lived in different neighborhoods, drove fancy cars, and attended private schools. It wasn't something that had any relevance to her life, not until now. After her call with Mr. Randolph, things began to move quickly. Documents were couriered to her doorstep, and Amara found herself signing papers that seemed more like abstract concepts than real agreements. Bank accounts were set up, investments were discussed, and within weeks the first transfer of funds was made. Amara's name was now attached to a fortune she still couldn't fully comprehend. But as the money became a reality, so did the attention. At first, the changes were subtle. Neighbors who had never spoken to her before started greeting her with awkward smiles and overly enthusiastic waves. The grocery store clerk, who usually rang up her purchases in silence, suddenly wanted to make small talk. Even at the diner, where Amara continued to work despite her new financial status, things started to feel different. One evening, as she was refilling coffee for a group of regulars, she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. "Did you hear about Amara Jones?" one of the women said in a hushed tone, though not so hushed that Amara couldn't hear her. "Yeah, I heard. She inherited a fortune or something," another woman replied, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Can you believe it? I mean, good for her, I guess, but it just seems so strange. Out of nowhere, she's suddenly a millionaire? I don't know. Something about it feels off." Amara's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. She had always been used to whispers behind her back, but this was different. This was envy, curiosity, and judgment all wrapped into one. The worst part was that she couldn't argue with them. It did feel strange. Even she couldn't fully wrap her head around how someone like her, someone who had spent her entire life scraping by, could suddenly have access to millions. It didn't take long for the news to spread throughout the town. Suddenly, Amara was a topic of conversation wherever she went. People who had once ignored her now went out of their way to speak to her, while others seemed to distance themselves, as if her wealth had somehow made her different, unrecognizable. One afternoon, as she was walking home from the grocery store, she ran into Mrs. Thompson, one of the women whose house she had cleaned for years. "Amara," Mrs. Thompson called out, her voice unusually warm. "I was just thinking about you. How have you been?" Amara forced a polite smile. "I've been fine, thank you." "I heard about your good fortune," Mrs. Thompson continued, her eyes scanning Amara as if she were searching for signs of wealth. "Must be nice to have some extra breathing room now, huh?" Amara nodded, unsure of what to say. "It's been a lot to take in." "Well, don't forget where you came from, dear," Mrs. Thompson said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Money changes things, but it doesn't change everything." The words stung more than Amara cared to admit. Of course, she wouldn't forget where she came from. How could she? It was all around her, in the people she saw every day, in the way they treated her now that she had something they wanted. But the hardest part of all was the way it made her question herself. For so long, she had been invisible, just another face in the crowd. just another black woman trying to make ends meet in a world that was constantly pushing her down. Now, suddenly, she was in the spotlight, but not because of anything she had done. The money felt like both a blessing and a curse. It gave her opportunities she had never imagined, but it also came with a price. The judgment of others, the jealousy, the whispers that followed her wherever she went. Her brother Malik was the only one who seemed genuinely happy for her. When she finally told him about the inheritance, his reaction had been one of pure joy. $8 million? He had shouted, his eyes wide with excitement. Sis, we're rich. I can't believe this. But even Malik couldn't fully understand the weight Amara felt pressing down on her. The money wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility, one that came with more complications than she had ever anticipated. As the days went by, Amara began to withdraw from the world around her. She stopped going to the diner, stopped taking her usual walks through town. Instead, she spent her days at home, poring over financial documents, trying to understand what she was supposed to do next. The wealth, which had once seemed like a dream come true, now felt like a burden she wasn't sure she was ready to carry. And yet, deep down, Amara knew that she couldn't hide forever. The money had changed her life, and whether she liked it or not, she had to figure out how to live with it. The weeks that followed were nothing short of overwhelming for Amara. With each passing day, she found herself thrust deeper into the complexities of her new reality, a reality that seemed worlds apart from the life she had known. Her inbox was flooded with emails from lawyers, financial advisors, and estate planners, people she had never needed before, but who now claimed to be essential to her future. Calls from curious relatives, who had never taken much interest in her before, came one after another, asking vague yet probing questions about her newfound fortune. Amara tried to stay grounded, but it wasn't easy. Everywhere she turned, it felt like someone was either trying to take something from her or figure out how to benefit from her sudden wealth. Her once quiet life was now filled with noise, offers, demands, and expectations, all swirling around her like a storm she couldn't escape. One afternoon, she decided to meet with the financial advisor Mr. Randolph had recommended. It was one of many steps she needed to take to ensure that her inheritance was managed wisely. Or so she was told. The advisor's office was located in a sleek, glass-walled building downtown. Walking into the lobby, Amara felt out of place in her simple attire, jeans and a sweater she'd worn countless times before. The people around her, dressed in tailored suits and expensive shoes, barely spared her a glance, but the contrast between her old life and this new world was glaringly obvious. She was greeted by a sharply dressed receptionist and escorted into an elegant office where the financial advisor, Mr. Donovan, was waiting. He stood as she entered, offering a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Miss Jones, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the plush chair in front of his desk. Amara sat down, feeling the weight of her uncertainty pressing down on her. She had never dealt with this kind of wealth before, never had the need to consult with someone like Mr. Donovan, who spoke in terms that seemed both foreign and intimidating. "So, as I understand, you've come into a rather sizable inheritance," he began, his tone friendly but professional. "Congratulations on that. I'm here to help you make sure your money works for you and that you don't face any unnecessary financial risks." Amara nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant. I don't want to mess this up. I've never had this kind of money before, and it's a lot to take in." Mr. Donovan smiled reassuringly. "That's completely understandable. You'd be surprised how many people feel the same way when they come into wealth. But that's what we're here for, to guide you through the process and help you make smart decisions." As he launched into a presentation about investment portfolios, tax strategies, and charitable foundations, Amara's mind began to drift. She knew this was important, essential even, but the jargon felt so distant from her everyday life that it was hard to stay focused. The idea of having to make decisions about stocks, bonds, and real estate felt surreal, almost as if she were discussing someone else's life, not her own. But amid the flood of information, one thing became clear. This money, this inheritance, came with responsibilities she hadn't anticipated. She would need to protect it, grow it, and use it wisely if she wanted it to last. The stakes were higher than she had realized. As the meeting came to a close, Mr. Donovan handed her a thick packet of documents to review. Take your time going through these, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to call. We'll be in touch soon to finalize your plan. Amara thanked him, feeling both relieved and overwhelmed. As she left the office and stepped back into the bustling streets, she realized that her world had shifted in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. Back at home, Malik was waiting for her. He had always been the optimistic one, the dreamer in the family. While Amara had spent most of her life working and sacrificing for the sake of others, Malik had big ambitions. He wanted to go to college, study business, and one day start his own company. The inheritance, in his mind, was a stepping stone to that dream. "So, how did the meeting go?" he asked eagerly as soon as she walked through the door. Amara shrugged, dropping the packet of documents onto the kitchen table. "It went fine, I guess. There's just a lot to think about. It's more complicated than I thought." Malik picked up the packet and flipped through it, his eyes widening at the sight of the financial jargon. "Yeah, no kidding. This is like a whole other language." Amara sat down, rubbing her temples. "It's not just the money, Malik. It's everything that comes with it. People look at me differently now. Even Mrs. Thompson was acting weird when I saw her the other day." Malik frowned, leaning against the counter. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. It's like they don't see me as the same person anymore. Now that I have money, it's like I've changed in their eyes. But I haven't. I'm still me." Malik nodded slowly. "Yeah, but people are weird about money. They think it changes everything, even though it doesn't. You're still the same, Amara. You just have more options now." More options. The words echoed in Amara's mind. That's what it felt like. Her life was suddenly filled with possibilities she had never imagined before. But with those possibilities came pressure, expectations, and a constant fear of making the wrong choice. The next few weeks brought more challenges. Amara's name had started to circulate in the town, and though she had done her best to keep a low profile, it was impossible to avoid the whispers and stares. Some people congratulated her, their smiles thin and insincere. Others seemed to distance themselves, as if her wealth had somehow made her untouchable. Even at the diner, where she had worked for years, things began to change. The regulars who had once barely acknowledged her now made awkward attempt conversation, asking her about her plans for the money, dropping hints about their own financial troubles. It was exhausting. One night, after closing up the diner, Amara sat outside on the back steps, staring up at the stars. She had always found comfort in the night sky, its vastness reminding her that her problems were small in the grand scheme of things. But tonight, even the stars felt distant. "Mind if I join you?" a voice said, startling her. Amara looked up to see Janelle, her coworker, and one of the few people she considered a friend, standing nearby. Janelle was a single mother who had always been straightforward and no-nonsense, and Amara appreciated that about her. "Sure," Amara replied, scooting over to make room on the step. Janelle sat down with a sigh, pulling her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "I heard about the inheritance," she said, her tone casual but curious. Amara tensed, bracing herself for the inevitable questions or subtle digs. "Yeah, I guess everyone has by now." Janelle chuckled softly. "Small town. Word gets around fast." Amara nodded, waiting for the conversation to take a turn. But to her surprise, Janelle didn't press. Instead, she sat quietly for a moment, gazing up at the sky. "I just wanted to say," Janelle began after a pause, "don't let anyone make you feel bad about it. You deserve it, Amara. You've worked hard your whole life, and if anyone deserves a break, it's you." Amara blinked, caught off guard by Janelle's words. "Thanks. I don't know if I deserve it, though. It feels weird." Janelle shrugged. "Maybe it feels weird because you've never had anything come easy before, but that doesn't mean you're not worthy of it. Don't let other people's opinions get in your head. They're just jealous." Amara, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in weeks. Janelle's words were a reminder that not everyone saw her differently. Some people still saw her for who she was, Amara, not just the woman who had inherited millions. As the two sat together in silence, Amara realized that her world had indeed changed, but maybe that wasn't a bad thing. With change came challenges, yes, but it also brought the opportunity for growth, for new beginnings. And for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she could figure this out. Amara didn't fully grasp how much her life had shifted until she found herself standing at a podium, speaking to an audience of local leaders and business people. They had invited her to attend a community event designed to celebrate local success stories, and now that she was in the public eye, her name was automatically included in those conversations. She had been hesitant to attend at first, unsure of how to navigate this new world where she was no longer simply Amara, the waitress, but Amara, the millionaire. Yet something inside her had urged her to go, something that whispered, "You need to be seen." Her hands gripped the sides of the podium as she spoke about her journey, about growing up in this very town, about working 2 jobs just to keep her family afloat. The faces in the audience were a mixture of surprise, intrigue, and admiration. She felt their eyes on her, felt the weight of their attention, and for the first time in her life she realized that she had the power to shift the narrative. "This town has always been home," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions stirring inside her. "But it's also a place that's made me feel invisible. I know what it's like to be overlooked, to be judged by the color of your skin before people even take the time to know who you are. And for years, I thought that was just the way things were, something I had to accept." She paused, scanning the crowd. She saw a few familiar faces, people who had once dismissed her, people who had made her feel small with their offhanded comments or indifferent glances. But now those same people sat in silence, listening to her every word. "But now," she continued, "I realize I don't have to accept it. None of us do. Wealth doesn't change who I am, but it has given me something I never had before: visibility. And with that visibility comes responsibility. I don't want to use this gift just for myself. I want to invest in this community, in the people who have been overlooked and underestimated, just like I was." There was a ripple of murmurs in the audience, but Amara held her ground. She had spent too long letting other people dictate how she saw herself, too long believing she didn't have the right to speak up. But that time was over. Now she had a voice, and she intended to use it. The weeks following her public speech were a whirlwind of activity. Amara had made a commitment to herself and to her community, and she was determined to follow through. She met with local leaders, educators, and nonprofit organizations to figure out how best to invest in programs that could make a real difference. She wanted to focus on education, on providing scholarships for young Black students in the area who had the potential to succeed but lacked the resources to do so. She knew, from personal experience, how much of a difference opportunity could make in someone's life. But as she threw herself into her new role as a philanthropist and community advocate, she also began to encounter resistance. Not everyone was eager to embrace her vision. Some of the local business owners, especially those who had always held the town's power structures in place, viewed her sudden rise with suspicion. "I don't understand why she's so focused on race," one businessman said at a town hall meeting. "Why can't we just invest in the community as a whole? Why make it about Black or white?" The comment, though veiled in polite language, stung. Amara knew it was a reflection of deeper, unspoken biases. There were people in the town who were uncomfortable with the idea of a Black woman not only being wealthy, but also using her wealth to empower others like her. It challenged their long-held beliefs about who deserved power and who didn't. But Amara wasn't deterred. She had spent her whole life navigating spaces where she wasn't wanted, and now, with her new resources and platform, she was determined to open doors for others. She met with teachers, community leaders, and activists to strategize on how best to implement scholarship programs and mentorship initiatives for students of color. The town might not have been ready for her bold ideas, but she was ready for them. One day, while visiting a local high school to discuss scholarship opportunities, Amara found herself drawn to a particular classroom. It was the same school Malik had attended, and walking through those halls brought back memories, some good, some not. As she approached the classroom, she noticed the students inside were gathered in small groups, working on projects. A young girl at the front of the room caught her attention. She was sitting alone, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she scribbled furiously in a notebook. Something about the girl's intensity, her focus, reminded Amara of herself at that age. She knocked gently on the door and entered, introducing herself to the teacher. "Amara Jones?" the teacher exclaimed, clearly surprised. "It's such an honor to have you here. Please, come in. The students would love to meet you." Amara smiled and nodded, though she still felt a little uncomfortable with the attention. She walked over to the girl at the front, whose name was Destiny. She seemed shy, hesitant to speak, but when Amara sat down next to her and asked what she was working on, Destiny's eyes lit up. "It's a project on civil rights leaders," she explained, pushing her notebook forward so Amara could see. "I'm writing about Rosa Parks and how she refused to give up her seat on the bus. It's inspiring, you know? How she just didn't back down." Amara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "It is inspiring, and you know you have that same strength in you. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you can't make a difference. You're capable of more than you know." Destiny smiled shyly, but Amara could see a spark in her eyes. She saw in that moment the reason why she was doing all of this, the reason why she had stepped up out of the shadows and into the light. It wasn't just about the money or the prestige. It was about giving girls like Destiny the chance to see themselves as more than what society told them they were. As she left the school that day, Amara felt a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. For years she had worked silently, tirelessly, just trying to survive. Now she was working with purpose, with a clear vision of what she wanted to achieve. But not everyone was pleased with Amara's newfound strength. As her influence grew, so did the resentment from certain quarters of the town. Some people whispered behind her back, questioning her motives, accusing her of stirring up trouble by focusing so much on race. One afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor at her office. Mr. Thompson, a well-known businessman in town, who had made it clear in the past that he wasn't a fan of her efforts. "Amara," he said, his tone polite but cold, "I've been hearing a lot about your plans for these scholarships. I understand you want to help the community, but don't you think it would be better to focus on programs that benefit everyone? This town doesn't need more division." Amara raised an eyebrow, her patience wearing thin. "This town doesn't need more division," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "But that's exactly why I'm doing this, because for too long, opportunities haven't been equal. Some of us have been left behind, and I'm trying to change that." Mr. Thompson smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I just think you're making things harder for yourself. There are better ways to spend that money." Amara stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Thompson, but I know exactly what I'm doing." As he left, Amara felt a surge of anger, but also a renewed sense of determination. She wasn't going to let people like Mr. Thompson derail her plans. She had come too far, and the stakes were too high. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her community, about creating a future where people like Destiny could thrive without having to fight the same battles she had. In the weeks that followed, Amara launched her scholarship program, despite the pushback. She began working with local schools to identify students who would benefit from financial aid, mentorship, and guidance. The program was a success, and soon, students from all over the town were applying, eager for the opportunity to break free from the limitations that had held them back for so long. Through it all, Amara's confidence grew. She no longer doubted herself or questioned her right to be in the spaces she occupied. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her strength. And with each step she took, she knew she was creating a legacy, not just for herself, but for every young person who had ever been told they weren't enough. Amara's life had changed in ways she had never imagined, but as she stood at the forefront of this new chapter, she knew one thing for certain. She had finally stepped into the fullness of who she was meant to be. The scholarship ceremony was held in the town's modest community center, a space that, much like Amara herself, had seen years of wear and resilience. The building was old, with creaky floors and faded walls, but today it was filled with an energy that transcended its humble appearance. Bright banners hung from the ceiling, and the smell of freshly baked goods from local bakers filled the air. The room was packed with families, students, teachers, and community members, all gathered to celebrate something that had once seemed impossible. A scholarship fund dedicated to lifting up students of color in their town. Amara stood at the back of the room for a moment, taking it all in. She watched as students and their families entered, some looking anxious, others excited, their eyes filled with hope and anticipation. This was what she had worked for. It wasn't just about the money. It was about giving these kids a chance to believe in themselves, to show them that they were worthy of every opportunity life had to offer. As she walked toward the front of the room, she was greeted with smiles and handshakes, words of gratitude that still felt surreal to her. The same town that had once treated her as invisible was now acknowledging her as a force for change. But what mattered most to Amara was that the students, kids like Destiny, were being seen, really seen, for the first time. The ceremony began with speeches from local leaders, but the room came alive when Amara took the stage. She looked out at the sea of faces, her heart full of emotions she hadn't expected. This moment was bigger than her. It was a culmination of not just her journey, but the journeys of everyone who had ever been made to feel less than because of who they were. "Thank you all for being here," Amara began, her voice strong but filled with warmth. "Today isn't just a celebration of these students. It's a celebration of possibility. When I started this scholarship, I wanted to make sure that the young people in our community knew that their future wasn't limited by the circumstances they were born into. I wanted to show them that they deserve every opportunity, every dream, every chance to succeed, just like anyone else." The room was silent, every eye on her as she spoke. For years, Amara had been silent too, unsure of her place, unsure of her worth. But standing here now, she realized just how far she had come. She had found her voice, and with it, she was lifting others up. "Many of you know my story," she continued, glancing at some of the familiar faces in the audience. "You know I didn't come from wealth or privilege. I've worked 2 jobs, struggled to make ends meet, and faced the kind of prejudice that can make you feel invisible. But I'm here to tell you that none of that defines who you are. What defines you is your resilience, your kindness, and your strength." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I know that this town hasn't always been easy for everyone. There are people in this room who, like me, have felt the weight of being judged before they're even given a chance. But today is about changing that. Today is about acknowledging that we all have value, that we all have something to contribute, and that we all deserve to be seen for who we truly are." As she finished her speech, the room erupted into applause. Amara felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest. It wasn't the applause or the recognition that moved her. It was the realization that she had created something lasting, something that would continue long after she was gone. Over the next few months, Amara's scholarship program flourished. More students applied, more community members got involved, and soon the program expanded beyond the town, reaching students from nearby areas who also needed a chance. Amara became a well-known figure, not just in her town but in the surrounding communities, admired for her generosity, her vision, and her unwavering belief in the power of kindness. But despite her success, Amara remained grounded. She continued to live in her modest home, still driving the same old car she had before her inheritance. The wealth had given her the means to make a difference, but it hadn't changed who she was at her core. She still found joy in the simple things, in spending time with Malik, in visiting her mother, in taking quiet walks through town. The money had opened doors, but it hadn't consumed her. It had instead allowed her to become the best version of herself. However, as her influence grew, so did the challenges. There were still those in the town who resented her success, who whispered that she had somehow bought her way into respect. They questioned her motives, insinuating that she was only doing all of this to make herself look good. But Amara refused to let the negativity take root. She had learned long ago that people would always have something to say, especially when a black woman dared to step outside of the narrow box society tried to place her in. One day, after a particularly difficult town meeting where her proposals to increase diversity in local businesses were met with resistance, Amara found herself feeling exhausted. She had given so much of herself to the community, but there were still days when the weight of it all felt too heavy to bear. She went to visit her mother, seeking comfort and wisdom in the familiar warmth of her childhood home. Her mother, frail but sharp as ever, greeted her with a soft smile as Amara sat down beside her. They talked for a while about everyday things, about Malik's plans for college, about the garden her mother still tended to with great care. But eventually, the conversation turned to the topic that had been weighing on Amara's mind. "I'm trying, Mama," Amara said, her voice thick with frustration. "I'm doing everything I can to make a difference, but sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, it's not enough. Some people will always see me as that poor girl from the diner, no matter how much I try to change things." Her mother reached over and placed a hand on hers, her touch light but comforting. "You've already changed more than you know, baby. Don't let other people's small minds make you question yourself. The work you're doing, it's important, and not everyone is going to understand that, but that doesn't mean you stop." Amara looked down at her mother's hand, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always been her mother's daughter, strong, resilient, and determined. But it wasn't until now that she truly understood what it meant to live a life of purpose. "I just want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing," Amara whispered. Her mother smiled, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. "You are, Amara. You've built something beautiful, something that will outlast all the noise. And in the end, that's all that matters. You're giving these kids a chance, just like I always wanted for you. You're showing them that kindness is strength. That's more than enough." As the years passed, Amara's scholarship program continued to grow, touching the lives of hundreds of students. Her legacy became one of kindness, resilience, and unwavering strength. She had built something that mattered, something that transcended wealth and status, something that was rooted in the simple belief that everyone, no matter their background, deserved a chance to succeed. Amara's life had taken turns she never could have imagined, but through it all, she had remained true to herself. She had used her inheritance not just to change her own life, but to lift up others, to create opportunities where none had existed before. And in the quiet moments, when the world wasn't watching, Amara found peace in knowing that she had done what she set out to do. She had turned the gift she had been given into something far greater than herself. She had created a ripple of change that would continue to spread for generations. Her story was one of kindness, of strength, and of the power of believing in people. It was a reminder that, no matter where you come from, you have the ability to shape your future and the futures of those who come after you. As she stood in front of another group of scholarship recipients, ready to begin their journeys, Amara smiled. Her heart was full. This was her legacy, and it was just the beginning. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.